Welcome to Global TV. Today we have a very acclaimed film producer, documentary filmmaker, and space scientist, space broadcast specialist, Mr. Jonathan Leavy from London. His documentaries are making rounds across the globe and it appears on channels like BBC World. Welcome to the show, sir. My first question to you is, how would you rate the recent success of India as far as Chandrayaan or lunar mission is concerned? And
Well, I think
it is going to change for Indian space research?
well, I think it's been a huge achievement for India, for ISRO, and all those involved in the Indian space program. I think it possibly comes as no surprise, maybe to the scientists there, of their own capabilities, but has certainly opened the eyes of the world for those who were not aware of the capabilities of India. And I think this not only gives confidence for those involved with India's space program, but it also strengthens India's position as a significant partner with the international community. And we know that there are programs being planned with Japan, the United States, and their involvement of the European Space Agency. So I think this has been really important for India, over and above the huge success of getting that first landing at the South Pole of the Moon, and for India joining that exclusive club of now only 4 countries who have successfully landed on the Moon.
Okay. Now, my second question is, sir, now comparing it with NASA, an age-old organization, and before NASA, too, US government had a space organization which is called NACA, and they are very advanced. I was watching Crew 7 mission, but when we compare a space program such as of India, which started from primitive days like carrying the parts of a spacecraft on a bullock cart and bicycle to projection center, and now where, as you are saying, that it's only country which has landed on South Pole, that's true. And it now has many other space missions in line like Aditya L1 and then Gaganyaan. Somewhere it is partnering with its eastern partner. With NASA, it has signed an accord for Artemis program. How you see how it is going to grow in coming days, and what is the role of political leadership in overall growth of space research in India?
Well, I think it is good for India and it's good for Israel, because success and potentially where the political will around it sees such great public response, it will, I am sure, put ISRO in a good position for budgeting and funding going forward. Now, out of necessity, it has had to work with relatively limited budgets in comparison to its counterparts such as NASA or ESA or the Japanese space agencies, and has used its ingenuity to achieve great success within a limited budget. Now, I think as more budget becomes available, providing they don't get sloppy with their budgets, they could achieve great things going forward. And we've already seen the ambition to actually launch India's own astronauts with its own launch vehicle, missions to study the sun, then the possibility of doing more on the moon and going beyond potentially to the planets. You know, India has a great opportunity. And I think politically, it's sort of a win-win, that because it's created such popularity with the public in India and increased its bargaining power, if you like, its influence in the international community. It's politically attractive to support space. And I know there's been some controversy over various people claiming the credit for setting India on its route to land on the moon. But nonetheless, outside, it's seen as an Indian success story. And I think going forward, it can only be good for Israel. It puts it in a powerful position to get the funding it needs to continue on its course of achievements in space.
Yes, very rightly you said, and I agree to that, that the political leadership in India, Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the Department of Science and Technology will not keep any stone unturned as far as financial support to ISRO is concerned. Now, coming to another question. Sir, Chandrayaan's lander is static, it's fixed on a one place. Rover is moving in a radius of 4 to 8 meters and it may go further. What, according to you, what it might be looking for at lunar surface?
Well, the fact that you have the rover and that it's able to move around is, stretches the scope of this mission, which only has an official time span of 14 Earth days, one lunar day. But the rover itself is out there looking at the composition of the soil, what's there on the moon at that part of the moon. It's also looking for individual elements that are present. It may not be able to draw conclusions about water necessarily, but it will provide some very useful data about this part of the moon, because all the space agencies are looking at this part of the moon because of its potential presence of water ice in hopefully large quantities, that this will be the place to create a permanent base for people going forward. And that's very, very important. And it's interesting to see that the rover has performed very well so far, and that they reported recently how it come across a big crater and it was able to maneuver around the crater. So, this is very, very good for, what might come in the next steps, because this is, I'm sure, a learning curve, and will build on the follow-up missions potentially to this part of the moon, and how India might make its own plans either independently or as a partner with the other nations for taking people to this part of the moon.
Okay, very right you said, sir. Secondly, one more question which I have. Chandrayaan-1, the first mission in Chandrayaan series, which was an orbiter. Chandrayaan-2 had an orbiter and it's still working, and had a lander and rover which crash landed. Chandrayaan-1 discovered that there are presence of icy waters on the lunar South Pole, which helped one of the NASA scientists, as far as my knowledge is concerned, who is now with Orion mission of NASA to carry manned mission in space and on lunar surface, Orion rocket. His name is Donald Hu or Harvard Hu. He said, on the basis of Chandrayaan-1 mission, that in future by 2030, we will be able to set up a small colonies, human colonies on lunar surface. So, if Chandrayaan-3 adds something in that discovery, how fast we can think of having humankind staying on lunar surface for a little longer period, like 1 month, 2 weeks, something like that.
Well, I think things are moving at a pace, but there are always technical challenges. So we've seen with the Artemis program in the United States, which aims to then it's had an uncrewed mission already, which has gone into this long orbit around the moon, which happened just under a year ago. They're planning to then put astronauts aboard Artemis potentially as early as November next year to orbit the moon. And they're saying that they hope they may be able to actually land people on the moon as early as maybe 2026, 27. At the same time, the Chinese are saying they're hoping to land people on the moon by the end of this decade. So things are moving at a pace. But what we have to watch as well, I think, is the private space sector. Because although NASA is contracting with people like Blue Origin and SpaceX, they're interested as well on the commercial opportunities. And it could be that the private sector may well take over, if you like, because of the potential return on investment. And there are already people looking at putting infrastructure on the moon, such as communications and server farms on the lunar area, looking at what else might be on the moon's minerals. So it's going to be very interesting. And where we see competition, we see speed, we see things happening much faster than we've been used to over the decades since the Apollo missions. So, a permanent base on the moon, potentially by the end of this decade, I don't think is unreasonable.
Okay, rightly you said, sir, as far as the private sectors are concerned, be it Lockheed Martin, SpaceX, Blue Origin, Virgin Galactic, there are a lot of players, and you might have heard that this Crew 7 was a joint effort between NASA and SpaceX. Similarly, Artemis mission, it will be on board on Orion rocket, and NASA is doing more, building up more rockets like Ares and other program. They have one mission on almost each planet, and another space mission which was launched in 1977, Voyager, is in interstellar space. It's an inspiration for rest of the world, but this coming to again to Chandrayaan mission and Aditya L1, which is called Suryayaan now. I have seen NASA ISRO director talking about lot has been written in Indian holy books like Vedas and other places about astronautics and every other thing. How would you see that? Where from ISRO is getting this big energy to build up such big missions on a low budget and record budget?
Yes, if I understand your question correctly, I think clearly there is so much celebration now, and with India being a trailblazer, particularly with the South Pole, there is a great, I guess, clamor to continue the dominance of India in its work in this area and reflect on all of that. And I think that bodes well for the continuing success and continuing investment in its explorations of the moon. And it is also an inspiration for a young generation to encourage them to go down at maybe a scientific or engineering route, get the appropriate qualifications. And I think it also creates great pride, which cannot be underestimated in a nation which has many challenges. And a point I've made to others is all nations, wealthy or not so wealthy, still may have poverty or challenges, yet they also have space programs. And there has been some debate in the international community about that, but certainly India has every right to invest in its space program for the benefits it will bring and the spin-offs it will bring, as well as the direct knowledge it will achieve in reaching out to the moon and beyond.
One more added question, sir. Only today, UK government, UK space agency is going to launch a space mission. Adityayan, Suryayaan is almost like NASA's Genesis mission, about which I had studied a little bit. which was launched in 2001, and it experimented around Sun till 2004. And while re-entering in Earth's atmosphere, it, it exploded just a few hundred meters away from on the deserts of Utah. So that was also gone in Lagrange 1 point, and it was static there and doing orbiting around Sun. It carried very crucial experiment. What do you expect from Aditya L1 mission, which is going to be launched on September 2?
Well, the sun is, to understand the sun and the chemistry of the sun and what's happening there is very important because of, I guess, our understanding of the cosmos and what's going on, but also in terms of the way the sun affects the Earth. We've seen some big eruptions from the sun recently, which have caused geomagnetic storms, affected communications, and can, threaten astronauts in space who sometimes have to take cover in more protected parts of their space station or spacecraft when these ejections come, and also understanding what happens when all that interacts around the Earth, which is protected by its magnetic field and the various belts around the Earth. So I think the more we can understand about the processes going on in the sun, the interactions and everything else, it's going to be very significant for forecasting for the future, as well as our knowledge of the fundamental processes of the universe as well. So, like we've seen with the missions to the moon, I am sure that the ISRO mission coming up to the sun will again produce some good results and possibly some new insights that hasn't been gained by other space agencies.
All in all, sir, how these missions, whether it is Chandrayaan 3 or the Aditya L1 or Suryayaan, how it is going to change the thinking among Indian scholars and budding Indian space scientists, because many question here in India, and I had seen how BBC.
You're back. Lovely. Did you get all of that, or do you need any of that again?
Yes, I am coming to my question once again. I'm saying, we have a different story here. I'm not talking about NASA and a huge country like United States of America, which has a budget reserved for NASA, whether it was President George W. Bush or President Trump or President Joe Biden. Everybody, fulfilled what NASA required in terms of finance. India, in a country like India, and particularly when we talk about ISRO, which started from a very beginning, and I remember I read starting from site experiment, satellite instructional television experiment, where NASA had borrowed a satellite ATS-6 to India, to ISRO, for educating rural population. Then Indian indigenous satellite program, which was called INSAT, and many other programs. Now we are at a stage where we are launching lunar mission. A section of persons, political leadership here, said, and even though BBC claims that the interview was altered with an acclaimed BBC broadcaster, which was saying how you will comment about space missions, costly space missions, when a lot of population of India is hungry. Similar opinion here, some of the opposition leaders are having. But space science, you are a space scientist, space, journalist. I am also a scholar of space science. I advocate for that. But how would you describe the opinion of those leaders, whether in India or abroad, which said not only about ISRO, but also about other space missions of other countries that on the stake of poverty, hunger, and deprivement, racial violence, how governments can invest such a huge amount on space mission. How would you comment about it?
Well, the argument that how can you go and spend money on space while there are so many challenges on Earth has been an argument there since the beginning of the space age. It has always been used, and the classic response is, first of all, we're not sending money into space. We're actually paying, training engineers, scientists, people to achieve this and achieve these programs, and that these programs themselves raise the ability of the country, of the world, to do greater things, and that those benefits end up coming back to Earth. So we can never say we can't do science, we can't do anything that's exotic, because there is hunger and poverty and these things. It is a balance, and quite often the amounts being spent, for example, particularly on India, which are relatively small on the space program, would not make a dent in the challenges that are faced. But by being successful in space, by getting intelligent people to follow space careers, it enriches the nation. And I think it also will bring benefits back, because it's not just about going to the moon. It's about communications, navigation, weather, helping with that information to protect people or warn people when there are extreme weather situations, to inform agriculture about how to be more productive. So all of this does come back. It has to be a balance. And in some respects, there would be, potentially increased poverty or longer periods of poverty without the advances that can be made through following scientific research and such programs as space. You might equally question things like defense spending or spending on luxury items. All of these things happen simultaneously in a developing economy.
That's correct. And one final question, which is coming in my mind since this Chandrayaan mission was launched. Do you think that the success of ISRO, in a way, and the way Chinese media is commenting about success of ISRO and has commented about when Chandrayaan-2 had crash landed, and China is little ahead to India in terms of space missions, do you think it's starting a kind of space race again, which was quite visible during Cold War? Or what do you think, if it's going to make a positive impact, as you said, that more competition will speed up programs, or how it will lead the development of space science and aeronautics across the globe, with the successful mission of ISRO as far as Chandrayaan-3 is concerned, and if L1 goes successful, and if Gaganyaan goes successful?
I think there is a growing space race, but it's very different to the original space race during the Cold War, because it isn't necessarily about being first now. It's about not being left behind. So that because space now supports so much critical infrastructure, it is strategically important. So on the one hand, what happens with all the satellites around the Earth that support critical infrastructure, it's important that A, you have that, and B, you can defend it. And where I think we will see a race, if you like, is in the military organizations are now being brought in to develop processes to defend space infrastructure and also to replace it quickly if it is taken out in an aggressive way by an adversary. So you've got that going on the one hand. And I think the desire to be seen to be, having space stations, getting to the moon, getting to Mars, I think there is more a degree of political political will to be seen to be doing that, to be seen to show that your technology, whatever it is at the forefront there. But I think it's more about keeping up now and not being left behind.
Okay, with this note, I thank you, Mr. Leavy, for joining on the Global TV, and you informed to my audience in a very scientific way. I hope space science will bloom up, and will yield new results. The Chandrayaan-3 as well as other missions of various other space agencies will yield successful results. And with this note, I thank you very much.
Thank you, Ratnesh. A pleasure as always.